Hi everybody, this is Greg Tiener for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Eddie, who is an intermediate photographer. Eddie says he went to a flower show with a specific mind to use the color combination of red and green, and he said he also wanted to work with the idea of less is more and work with abstraction. Eddie shot this with a Canon 5D. He used a 100mm macro lens at ISO 200, shot wide open at f2.8 and exposed the file for 1/200th of a second. One of the things that I like right away about the image is the shallow depth of field that Eddie's getting here, and the combination of being very close to the subject with a macro lens and shooting at f2.8. I love the way there are different layers of information in the image just based on flow of focus through the image. I love the way that moves my mind through the image, giving me the illusion that I can move through these spaces and not just across and up and down. The other thing I'm really enjoying is color. Right away, the little bit of red, so kind of going with less is more on the flower and showing quite a bit of the green. Great example of dynamic balance. A little bit of red balancing a whole lot more of green. Really beautiful quality of light here for this kind of subject matter. Subtle soft light falling on the scene, and that's creating some dimension, so you can see light hitting in some places and falling off, but the highlight and shadow pattern here is very, very soft, and it's not overwhelming the softness of the subject matter itself, and I'm really enjoying that. And I'm also just enjoying going for more of an abstraction in terms of creating more of a sense of space here, negative space in between things. There's almost more of a sense of that than there is the shape or outline of what you would normally consider the subject in a scene like this if you're shooting flowers or tulips. So just really great use of negative space as a subject matter in the image, and to push this more towards abstraction. There are a couple of basic things that I think about when I look at this image, and it's really just about making a variation that sings even more and even has a little bit more depth. And both of them really have to do with color. One of the things is that red is such a powerful color. It plays really well because of how visually powerful it is. It plays really well with two very extreme color ideas. One is black, which is the combination of all colors, and the other is white, the absence of color. Red plays real well with those extremes because in terms of a single primary color, it has the most visual weight. So when I look at this image, I almost immediately think about what would happen if this area in here became more of a pure black, and how that might play back and forth off of the red and maybe give the image even more depth, making this area seem like it's even further away, and then just doing a really good job of creating dynamic balance with the red. By the same sort of thought process, I also think about what happens if we increase contrast at the high end of things, pop out some of these areas that are looking like highlights. And then from there, I also think about the idea of three colors. In a scene like this where Eddie's choosing to work with the rectangle frame of the 35mm camera, the idea of the rectangle immediately suggests, just in the framing device, a symmetry that is dynamic instead of formal. And there are all different kinds of ways from a design standpoint that we can think about formal and dynamic symmetry. And in the same way, when we talk about rule of thirds or golden mean, and we talk about the idea of working odd numbers of things, we can think about color in the same way. When I see the red and green here, and I see some areas like this in the image that are just starting to go towards blue, I think what would happen if we push that even a little bit more and we created another dimension of color, and that might keep the viewer moving through this image in a way that they stay around a little bit longer. And again, just in the same way that making the black blacker might help them to feel like they can go deeper into the space, that having a third color there might do the same thing. Lots of different ways that we could go about doing this. I'm just going to go into the adjustment panel, and I'm going to just go to levels, and I'm going to click on this eyedropper right here, and it lets me sample a black point in the image. And I'm going to go right in here and click, and when I do that, I really like what happens. if we turn the eyeball on and off here on that adjustment, it just takes that whole area in there and it makes it much darker. And if we make this change in normal blending mode, it's obviously having an effect on the whole image, not just in making other areas go darker and creating more of a feeling of depth, but it's also having an effect on color. And what's interesting is when you do this, you see that blue that I was talking about seem to be even bluer in the image. And so if I go back to layers and I say, you know what, let's lean on that a little bit more. Again, a lot of different ways to do it, but we could go to the adjustment panel and go back to our choices here, and we could go to color balance, just one way to do this. And in this case, these are sort of low midtones, so just going to keep the tone on midtones up here and then just push the slider towards blue. And I'm going to overcorrect this a little bit, come back and go to layers and fill this mask with black. I'm going to do an Apple delete. I'm on a Mac, Control delete on a PC with the black as your background color. Will fill that mask. Grab the brush tool. I like to make these changes to mask when I'm applying something locally with zero hardness on the brush and start with a low opacity, and I'm already at 10% and I like that. Get a fairly big brush and just come in here, and now I'm painting with white and I'm basically applying a little bit more blue to these areas in the shadows that were starting to go towards blue, just to start to give more of a sense of dimension to the color, just pushing towards a third color. The thing about an image like this is once we started to come in and play around with it locally, and let me go ahead and turn the eyeball on and off here, it's pretty darn subtle, but you can see the blue coming up there. Once I start to do that, this is the kind of image where we're starting to create even more and more of a feeling of different space shapes and different levels of information back in here in the image now. And it really would just depend on personal taste, what you wanted to do. You could really start to create even more and more of a feeling of these different shapes being at different depths in the image by playing around mainly with the idea of local contrast now in those areas, but you could also continue to sort of push color and play around with the idea of color. I'm just going to stop there for today, and you could kind of in your own mind kind of see where else you could take it just based on the work that we've already done. This is where we started and this is where we ended up. Just a couple of basic changes. One thing I'll say right here at the end is I do think there's a variation in here. I think there are lots of variations. It's such a beautifully composed shot to start off with, but I think there's a variation where we could go even more abstract and do something like that. But I really like what Eddie has done here in the beginning. Really great use of color, great use of shallow depth of field, really great use of negative space shape to abstract a scene. Really beautiful image. I want to say a big thank you to Eddie for sharing this image with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique.